Welcome into the DNVR Avalanche podcast presented by DraftKings Sportsbook. Use code DNVR when you sign up to get amazing odds boosts every single day. Got a pick of the week for you as it is officially the first Rapids game of the season today. So come into the season with a little bit of confidence. Don't only take the Rapids to win, take them to win by 2. Rapids win by 2 or more. It's plus 310, right?
Or 3 or 4, 7.
So... Yahir says they're playing a bad team. I'm not going to lie. I don't know anything about the team they're playing or any of the teams in the CONCACAF. But I know the Rapids are dope, so I'm taking the Rapids to score 2, to win by 2. I'm going to probably lose money like I usually do in my picks of the week, but that's easy. All you have to do is fade my picks of the week, and you're good. You make money. So head on over to DraftKings. Be sure to use that DNVR code to get amazing odds boost every single day. Must be 21 or older, Colorado only. Other terms, restrictions, and conditions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Of course, if you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700. All right. So today, I guess it's not really significantly historical data. We're only going to go back to 2010, so it's not like we're really digging into anything way back. But we wanted to take a look at some of the deals made by Stanley Cup champs over the last 10, 15 years here, and maybe some historical ones from the Avs at least, just to see the Avs history in that department. It should be an interesting conversation because I do think you're going to see some bad trades. I think you're going to see some trades that had significant impact and some that really didn't. So it's going to be a little bit all over the board, and we're going to try to come to some sort of a conclusion on if it's even worth it to do trade deadline things.
I was excited when I don't remember which one of the two of you said that you were wanting to do this show today, but I was excited last time you said that because I feel like so much of the conversation you see on Avs Twitter right now, and honestly, even like talking to people up in the press box during games, is there's the camp of, oh, they need to go out and do something and push all in this year. And then there's the camp of, why? They're good enough. Just hold on to what they've got. They don't need to do anything. And I think this is a great exercise in having that exact conversation. Why is it that teams who think they're near the top feel like they need to add pieces when they're already good? And what do you give up? What makes it worth it? What kind of crosses that line? I just think it'll give a nice bit of context to all this conversation we've had recently.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's I think what we're going to see when we go through this, one, not all these teams were in the same situation. Like if you remember, LA won a Stanley Cup sneaking in as an 8th seed, and kind of their approach to that deadline, as we'll see, was a little different because one of the deals that they made was for that moment, and one of the deals that they made was more for the future. But I think it's really interesting that every single team on this list made a deal except for one. And we've got big deals, we've got little deals. They're all over the board. And so there isn't a we'll see doing it doesn't work or doing it does work. It's winning a Stanley Cup is really hard. You have to be really good to begin with. But every team, no matter what, pretty much feels like
they need that little bit extra one.
We want to, if you're really, really good, you owe it to the guys in that room to try and tinker enough to fill out what you could.
Yep.
And with this, one reason why we didn't want to go too far back into this is because the salary cap changed the math on this, where you couldn't just be like, oh, I'm comfortable giving up 6 pieces for these 2 guys, or whatever. You had to consider the money involved. There were actual limitations placed on teams, other than can you afford it?
I mean, you go back far enough, and it's like, hey, give us this guy, and we'll just give you $2 million.
Right? Like we'll give you cash, we'll give you picks, we'll give you players, we'll give you all kinds of shit. Very different.
Yeah.
Very different now, and so that's why we kind of wanted to limit this.
For sure.
to going too far back.
Yeah, the conversation needs to be at least somewhat relevant to today, and anything before the salary cap, other than we'll probably talk a little bit about things in Avs history directly.
Yeah,
I mean, the salary cap completely changed this franchise for 15 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could easily make the argument that Colorado was most negatively impacted by it.
Yeah.
Certainly one of the top teams, yeah.
It forced them to make decisions on, I mean, they weren't allowed to sign Peter Forsberg anymore.
Right.
Like financial commitments that they had made before the salary cap existed screwed them through no fault. Like, how are you going to know that the salary cap was going to be $30 million?
Right.
Yep.
So anyway,
was Forsberg traded out of Colorado ultimately?
Oh no. Yeah, I'm sorry.
He walked, right? Or,
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't walk, but
he was forced to not be re-signed.
Yeah.
It was Forsberg and Adam Foote. They could not afford to bring them back because they had it was like $18 million owed to Sakic, Wall, and Blake.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, funnily enough, it kind of worked out in their favor with the Forsberg thing because his career basically fell off a cliff.
I mean, he was really good for Philly. He just had the same problems.
He was really good for
always hurt.
1 year and then basically barely played.
Yeah. What happens? What happens if that 1 year he's in Colorado instead?
Fair enough. But a different history there.
My favorite, I guess it's not really a trivia, but like one of my favorite weird moments in NHL history is the fact that Peter Forsberg and Paul Kariya played for the Nashville Predators at the same time.
There's some really weird connections out there.
Like,
if you dig
knowing the Preds as they are, I'm surprised they don't have like a Hall of Heroes somewhere where they've got those guys like prominently displayed.
Raise the banner.
My first time in Nashville, I got off the airplane and I was walking through the airport and they had like this mural that Jason Arnott set up and I was like, this is fucking weird.
Yeah.
Because like I think of Jason Arnott as a New Jersey Devil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Whatever.
It's always weird to look through those things of like players wearing the wrong jersey.
Right.
And you're like, oh yeah, remember that time he played for that team?
Like Ray Bourque in Colorado.
Yeah, kind of. Most people remember him as a Bruin.
The Jerome McGinley 88 LA Kings is another one that
that
10 years
weird.
will be funny. See, I don't know why you guys hate Ray Bourque so much.
I don't hate Ray Bourque. I just don't think the Avs should have retired his number. That's all. It's one of the most iconic moments in NHL history.
It's just weird. Like he played 22 years and 20 and a half of them were in Boston. So it's just kind of
for sure.
It's like seeing Joe Namath in a Chargers jersey, like they're just like iconic players wearing weird jerseys at the end of their careers.
Had he not won, then I fully agree. But it was just one of those like you were in the moment, it all made sense at the time.
Yeah,
I like it.
You put up a Stanley Cup banner for that moment, not Ray Bourque's number, but whatever. Not the conversation of today.
No, this is the conversation now.
All right, so when the Avs traded for Rob Blake.
Look, the biggest news of today is that Michael Massey is out.
AJ's pumping those tires.
I'm just saying, I'm excited about that.
I'm just making more room for a Ferrari to cheat. Let's be real.
Great. As long as they win.
Anyway, you guys want to start in 2021 or you guys want to start in 2010? Which way
2010.
2010? All right. Well,
it's
2010 will be very quick. Chicago did not do anything at the deadline in 2010. That was the first cup of their mini dynasty, I guess.
Closest thing we've seen to one.
Yeah. So far, Tampa maybe working their way into that conversation now. But
I also, for the record, we were not very strict about deadline.
Yeah.
Like if a team made a move in the month or two leading up to it,
it's fine. Close enough.
That was also acceptable.
Yeah.
It was kind of just seeing what teams did during the season to get themselves better. And Chicago, because if you think back on that Chicago team, they were just starting their run. Yep. They were young and good, really, and they didn't really know how good they were.
Yep.
And so there wasn't like this major, we've got to do something. And they did nothing.
They had, let me actually see. Yeah. Taze was 21. Patrick Kane was 21. Yeah, a 22-year-old Hjalmarsson. A bunch of other young kids. Brian Bickle was 23. Duncan Keith was only 26. Very much. Wow, Jack Skeely was on that team. I always forget. Yeah, they were super young. They were still really trying to discover their own identity at this point. They ended up doing actually nothing at the deadline and going on and winning the cup. So if you are one of those people that are saying the Avs should do nothing, this is your team that you're pointing to and saying
there will be a couple of examples that get close to this too. Some teams that don't do very much significant.
But this is the team that actually did nothing in the last decade.
And let me tell you, I don't expect the Avs to do nothing.
I would be shocked if they didn't.
I mean, they've already got like the record for however many
like
years,
19 straight years or something.
Like that they've made a deadline deal.
Yeah,
but I would just say either way. I just can't imagine that they would do nothing, not a single thing.
I would be shocked if they did actually nothing.
Boy, would our show not be very good that day.
Yeah, oh God. Another trade. Look, at least if they actually do nothing, would that be better than waiting until an hour after the deadline to hear that they traded Chris Bigras?
I was pretty mad about that because we had done the whole live show at the media school that day, and Dater and I were sitting at the bar having a beer afterwards and having lunch. And then our phones buzz, and we look and we're just like, bro, are you kidding me with this?
That was our first attempt at like a live.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I don't know why I put it in quotes. It was it was live. And we were there for so long.
Yeah. And nothing happened on that deadline until the very, very, very end when the Ryan McDonough to Tampa Bay thing happened.
Yeah.
And that was a huge deal.
Right.
It was just like, okay, the Avs just didn't do anything. And then their one deal to keep the streak alive was Ryan Graves for Chris Bigras, which ended up mattering.
Yeah, I was going to say, which in that moment we were like, oh my God, we waited around all day for this. And then turned out to be a
year later. Graves was being an impact defenseman.
Positive thing up until overtime of second round last year.
Yeah, things didn't end so well, did they? Anyway, Chicago in 2010 is the team that did literally nothing. If that's the thing you want to emulate, there is one case of that since 2010 or since 2010 for the Avs to follow. But you get right into 2011 and you have Boston going the fuck off, doing all the things. Yeah.
Yeah. Boston did big things that year at the deadline. I included the Khudobin deal. I wasn't 100% sure if he was an NHLer at the time. Because I know he was like right on that. He was right on the cusp of getting into the league. But I included him. So
Giroux over Jason Miller every time. Yeah. All right. So there are 3 different trades here that Boston made. 4 actually, if you include Khudobin. Chris Kelly for a second. Rich Peverly and Boris Valabeek for Mark Stewart and Blake Wheeler. Thomas Caberlet for Joe Colborne, a first and a second. And then Anton Khudobin for Jeff Penner, and it was a prospect to be named later or something, I believe.
It was signing rights to a guy.
Oh, there you go. So mostly irrelevant.
Yeah, Mikko Lehtinen.
That's a name.
So they changed out their bottom 6 to go on their cup run.
Pretty much.
Yeah, well, and when you consider the Thomas Caberlet, Joel Colborne was mid-first round pick. And then they also gave up the first rounder and a second rounder I think the second rounder was conditional. I didn't really get into the conditions of stuff. It was just
it's not worth it to dig up that old stuff.
It didn't matter. But like Peverly, like Mark Stewart and Blake Wheeler, that's a huge deal.
Yeah.
Like those were foundational pieces when the Jets, when the Thrashers moved to Winnipeg and became the Jets.
Yep.
And like Blake Wheeler's obviously still there. He's their captain. That ended up being a franchise-defining deal for the Thrashers / Jets.
If you're looking at it, if you ignore the cup and you look at purely value of each player, Blake Wheeler is the best player in that deal by like a lot.
Right. And like Chris Kelly was near the end. Obviously Rich Peverly was involved in the Sagan deal.
Yep.
After that. And then Caberlet was at the end, and then Khudobin, obviously, that was the very beginning of his career that kind of kickstarted it. So
he played one game for Boston that year.
So it's really those three. The first three are really the ones that really actually like those guys made a difference.
Impact on the cup run, sure.
But they went hard on the future, and they won that cup.
Yep. They got over the hump.
That's your all in, pushed a bunch of future chips into the middle, and it paid off.
Well, and that's what we always say, right? Like, if you do the thing, if you win the cup, no one cares how many picks you have left. No one cares what your prospect pool looks like. You just want a Stanley Cup.
Nobody was sitting there in Boston lamenting giving up Blake Wheeler in that deal. Oh, man, I wish we hadn't done that. No. Helped him win a Stanley Cup that year. Don't know how it would have gone otherwise.
Yeah, it's hard to argue against the Stanley Cup. I think that's certainly true. So,
before we move on, I just saw in chat someone refer to them as Girl Guide cookies. Is that the Canadian version that we were talking about the other day for Girl Scout cookies?
The, like garbage ones?
Yeah,
the fake Oreos.
Girl Guide.
That sounds like something Canada would
I
do instead of Girl
about that
Scouts.
alliteration. Yeah, yeah, that's like the off-brand Girl Scouts. Well, we don't have Girl Scouts; we have Girl Guides. It's like,
completely ignoring this aside. You know what I love about a guy like Rich Peverley is like a depth guy that you get, and you're like, oh, maybe he can help you out. He played 23 games for Boston that year and scored 7 points, and then in the postseason had 12 points in 25 games.
So, dude, that's the other thing that is always interesting. There's always one, usually from the team that goes on to win the cup, because that ends up being kind of the difference. But like I remember the year for Chicago. I think it was the lockout shortened year when Brian Bickle went off in the postseason, and it was just like, okay, sure. He matches his season point total in the first 2.5 rounds. And yeah, Rich Peverley, same type of thing. Like it's just weird how you have those guys that emerge out of your bottom six to suddenly.
Oh, and for the record, Rich Peverley had a 50-point year the year before. Like that was the height of his powers. But I just thought that was a fun, like, their playoff run 2 years later, 21 games played, 2 goals, no assists. Right. And they don't win the cup. And you're like,
shocker.
So anyway, I love little tidbits like that where you look back at a cup run and you're like, how did it all come together? Because it really takes everything kind of going your way for 4 rounds. Yeah. And that includes a guy like Rich Pepper. I mean, that would be like that would be like a Val Nichushkin, putting up 15 points in a cup run.
It might be even less than that. It might be more like
I was going to say
JT Compher or something like that. Yeah.
JT Compher's never had a 50-point season.
That's true, but neither has Val Nichushkin, I guess.
Was that an outlier though for Rich Peverley?
No, that the 55.
Yeah.
Yes, but he was really good.
I mean, the thing with Peverley's career is it was ended so shortly that
he had the year he got traded, 2011. He had 41 points. The next season, he had 42 points. That's like he was a borderline top 6 guy. So
yeah.
Anyway,
he was fine. It worked out for Boston in that case. That much is certain. Be sure to head on over get yourself some ranch riders when you can. They're absolutely delicious. You can't go wrong. You can get either vodka or tequila in them. Highly recommend you go check them out. They got the ranch water, which is a thing from Texas that I don't really understand what it is. I understand that it tastes good. And you know what? That's all I really need to know. I don't need to know any more details than that. Go check it out. They're absolutely delicious. They come in a can, originated from a food truck down in Texas, but now they're one of the 10 fastest selling alcohol brands in the country. So they're really darn good. Everyone I talk to pretty much loves them. So it's hard to miss with that. If you haven't tried one, you gotta get one in your mouth. Give it a go. They're absolutely delicious. Check it out. If you're any kind of a spirits drinker, they will like it quite a bit. You can also, of course, check out Green Mountain Dental Group. Make sure you're taking care of your teeth. We schedule a cleaning, x-ray, and exam with them. They have you covered with a free Sonicare toothbrush just for doing your due diligence, taking care of your teeth. So be sure to check out Green Mountain Dental Group, just 15 minutes from downtown in Lakewood, and get yourself that free Sonicare toothbrush. Second period of the DNVR Avalanche podcast presented by DraftKings Sportsbook. All right. So we've kind of looked at the two extremes now in 2010 and 2011, where you saw Chicago do nothing and Boston literally throw a bunch of shit at the wall, and it worked out for them. You get to 2012, you get to this LA team, and this is the first. I really don't like this term, but people would call this a hockey trade, right?
Why don't you like it?
Yeah, I was gonna say I would love to know what the
every trade is a hockey trade.
Okay,
you're a hockey.
This is like a goal scorer's goal line.
Yeah.
Okay, I get you.
But like the Fleury trade in the offseason, that's not a hockey trade. That's purely a business trade. You know what I mean?
It can be for business reasons, but it's two hockey teams trading players.
Well, what was the deal?
The deal was Jeff Carter for Jack Johnson and a first.
Yeah, that's absolutely a hockey trade. Because
remember that there were some context to this because Columbus had traded Jakub Voracek and a first-round pick to Philadelphia for Jeff Carter.
Yep.
And Jeff Carter threw a monstrous bitch fit about it and didn't want to report to Columbus. And then when he did, he wasn't trying very hard.
Yeah.
He wasn't putting any effort in whatsoever. And now LA rolled in and Columbus was like, we're trying to take ourselves seriously here. We're trying to transition from the expansion franchise that can't win anything and it's completely irrelevant into a serious franchise. We think we just went and got a number one center. They wanted to grow up and be taken seriously. And then Jeff Carter was like, yeah, now. And pouted his way out of town. And Columbus was like, okay, now we have to do something. And
the number of players that have done that in Columbus is its own show.
Well, and now it is. But back then, it hadn't started happening.
Yeah, this was kind of the first one.
And so he was just like, now. Because Jeff Carter and Rick Nash together should have been dope. Mm-hmm. That should have been pretty cool. A good foundation to build from. It didn't work out that way. And then they move in for Jack Johnson and a first, which they lost that deal.
I don't think it's as bad as people will look at Jack Johnson now, but yeah, they absolutely lost the deal. You know, Jeff Carter goes on to continue being Jeff Carter and put up 60 points on the reg for LA.
Yeah, goes on to be the perfect skill player for a Kings team that needed somebody who could score.
For the record, Jack Johnson did have a 40-point season in Columbus. That's all.
Yeah. I was going to say Jack Johnson was dope for a while.
Jack Johnson was solid for a year or two there. He was getting crushed a lot defensively, but yeah.
He was also dealing with a lot of off-ice issues.
Yeah, well documented.
Poor guy, too.
Yeah, by the way, that ended up being Jeff Carter for Jakub Voracek and Sean Couturier.
Jesus, that's a brutal looking trade if you want to put it like that.
Even the third round pick that they gave up to Philly in that deal turned into freaking Nick Cousins. Even that part of it blew up in their face.
Not great for Columbus. Good for LA though. Jeff Carter obviously goes on, helps them to win their first cup. So obviously there's a little bit of context here that you have to understand. We're looking at trades made by Stanley Cup champions, right? There's a whole bunch of trades we're not talking about that a bunch of teams made that they didn't go on to win cups.
Out, right?
Yeah.
But when you look at one, I think especially like this Jeff Carter one, it's hard not to think that he didn't help that team get over the hump.
Well, yeah, because like I said, man, I mean, Jack Johnson on that defense was fine, but moving him for a top flight forward because they needed the goal scoring, they needed the offense. That was a team that was literally trying to win 2-1 every night.
Yep.
And he was kind of he ended up being the guy that tied that 70s line together, and was like what made it work.
Well, and that year's LA team is an interesting one because that wasn't so much about them getting over the hump. To AJ's point, like that was a team that struggled to score, and a lot of people looked at it. And that was when Jonathan Quick was kind of at the height of his powers. That team had a lot of good pieces, and it was just like, well, unless they start scoring more, they're not going to be competitive. They're going to have a hard time winning a playoff series if they can't put the puck in the net. And so that was more of and again, going back to like the term hockey trade, that was a trade where like, hey, we want to get better. You guys want a good defenseman. Let's just do this. And everyone's kind of happy with it. And then, yeah, Jeff Carter goes off. Like you said, I had forgotten about that 70s line. I mean, that line goes nuts. And that was a great example of how like LA wasn't just missing a player. They were missing like the right player. Which honestly, and that we're building towards it, but that to me is kind of where the Avs are at right now. I don't think they need anybody to make them a great team or whatever. Obviously, they're already an elite team, but they are just missing like a little bit of that something past the first line, and that's kind of what Jeff Carter was. But for them, it wasn't about getting over the hump. It was, well, we got to do this to round our team out, and it ended up pushing them.
They were the only playoff team that year to not score 200 goals in the regular season. Yep. They had 95 points, and they lost more games during the regular season than they won.
The Carter one is also a case for it to maybe not be a rental, as he was actually an insanely important piece to their next cup run in 2014, where he was like a point per game player in the playoffs that year. So if we're calling it a hockey trade, maybe something to consider the expanding impacts of a player coming to the team beyond just the immediate playoff run.
That was a big move, though. Like Jack Johnson had been drafted in the top 5. Both guys were still young. Jeff Carter was on that huge contract he had just signed. The Kings had also just traded for Mike Richards before then. Like they went hard, man. Like they went after it, and the Jeff Carter piece was just like, that's a big, like Jack Johnson. We think of Jack Johnson in a certain light today, but in 2012 when they make this deal, Jack Johnson was still considered like one of the premier young defenders in the league. Mm-hmm. And added a first round pick to that to get Jeff Carter. That was a big deal.
Jack Johnson was 1 year removed from being an Olympian.
Yep. So certainly a bit of a banger of a deal, to say the least.
Yeah. I mean, that was a big deal.
Yeah.
So they only made the one move, but
it was large, to say the least. And
that's the kind of move where you're like, look, they keep Jeff Carter. So this isn't your classic rental. This is
right.
You know, they use that from then on.
Yeah. So you're looking at there's not a ton of dudes on the deadline this year for the Avs that really have significant multi-year deals. There's a couple you could talk about. JT Miller has a year left on his deal, but
Yeah, a lot of the guys being talked about are your classic UFAs. There's not many guys with term that are getting moved around.
Yep. So might be tough to find a real good comparison there. Now, you could get into a conversation of maybe you go get Claude Giroux and look to extend him or something like that.
Right.
But
this year's deadline is interesting though, just because I don't remember the last time there was this many like high profile guys that people felt this
heading towards
confident
UFA,
we're going to be moving. Yeah. Like, I feel you've had it in the past, but a lot of those guys, like, yeah, they're around, but the team feels like they can re-sign them. They want to stay where they're at. This feels like the first year where it's like a lot of these guys are walking in the summer. So I don't know. This is a really intriguing deadline.
I do think part of that conversation is the top of the league. Look at how far the Avs are ahead of the West, and there's a bunch of teams in the West going, well, we're not catching that. The same thing. It's three teams in the East really that are just torching everybody else, right?
Yeah.
So I think it does get a little bit easier for teams to say, yeah, we're out of this one, but not a lot of moves have been made yet. So maybe don't jump the gun on that. 2013, Chicago again essentially did nothing. They traded a 4th-round pick for Michael Jesus, and that was it for the minist of maxing on that deal.
Yeah, that's the one where you're like, look, our core is young, our core is really good. We just kind of need a guy to come in and fill a specific role for us.
Yep.
We don't need a lot of help. We just want the right guy here. Looking for more role than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think if they end up doing that, like if that's what Colorado does, is they make the Hanzus type of move, that's fine.
Yeah. I would have. I think that's at minimum what Colorado will do, right?
Yeah.
There's no guarantee they make the big move, but again, I think we'd all be shocked if they actually do nothing.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say if Joe Sakic decides that the cost on Giroux Pavelski is far exceeding what he wants to spend, yeah, like you said, I'd be pretty floored if he didn't get into this level market.
Yep,
that was 13.
That was 2013. Yes.
Yeah. For the record, Hanzus played 23 games in the postseason and had 11 points.
So pretty impactful.
Yeah. For a guy who was pretty well at the end of his career in the NHL.
Yep.
He had fallen off. You know, he'd been really productive NHLer in his time, but he was at the end of the line there. But kind of got at a little bit of the fountain of youth in the playoff run and was pretty important for them.
Again, just looking at chat here is a little bit of an aside. The question there, I just want to hear what you guys have to say.
What?
Which
the Kadri or Giroux? To me, it's pretty easy.
Giroux,
yeah,
for
by
sure.
by like a mile.
It's mostly like, and it's now getting on to a lot of times that we have talked about this, but Alex Newhook exists.
Right.
And we've seen it. Kadri doesn't work on the wing. So.
Yeah. And you're expecting, like, Kadri is already, 32?
Yep. I mean, Drew's 34, but yeah.
Yeah, Drew is older, but you have that replacement, and you're expecting, like, Drew's drop-off has already started.
Yep. But
he's coming from a higher level.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So... And with Giroux, you're just not. The answer is Giroux.
Through the course of his career, Giroux has regularly been a point per game player. Kadri is doing it for the first time ever.
Yeah,
this year.
Right.
So
Giroux's got 100-point season.
Yeah, exactly.
Like 3.
Not all that. I'll say not all that long ago.
This is like 5, but
it's not.
It is.
It's not.
It's 4.5. Exactly. It was 17-18 was this 100-point season.
Did he have a 90-point year then?
He had an 85-point year the year after that.
Okay.
Which would have been the COVID shortened year, right?
No, that was 18-19, and then the COVID shortened year, he had 53 and 69. Anyway, one more here. LA apparently just farming Columbus this decade. as they pull in 2014. They pull Marian Gaborik out of, at that point, he was in Columbus, for Matt Fratton, a second and a third. And then they get into a weird-looking trade as they get 2 seconds, Braden McNabb and Jonathan Parker, for Hudson Fasching and Nick Delorier.
Yeah, and at the time, Hudson Fasching
had some hype on him.
Yeah, there was a lot of shine on him as a prospect that just needed opportunity. And Nick Delorier was viewed as like a pretty skilled, tough guy.
Yeah,
obviously it has not panned
something
out that
more
way.
than just a fourth liner there.
Yeah, but the Gaborik deal, obviously good and solid. The question with Gaborik was always health.
Yep.
Like he just couldn't, and then when he got to LA, things turned around a little bit for him where he stayed healthy-ish for long enough to be an impact player for them for a few years. But that deal, the McNabb thing was always kind of odd.
It's always weird to see a team buying and then they're going out and getting picks back. So
it was just like Braden McNabb just fit their personality so well.
Yep.
That it was, and it ended up being worth. Hudson Fasching didn't turn into anything.
Right. Braden McNabb is the best player in that deal. So good job, LA, I guess.
Yeah. Kind of an odd deal, but like one, again, you're talking, the Gaborik is like your classic, like older guy. We're just trying to get the last vestiges of what was once a high-end player.
And they did in LA.
Yeah, we're trying to get the last parts of an impact guy here. Not expecting him to be 40 goal scorer Minnesota Wild Marian Gaborik, but at least like top 6. It brings a little bit of a dynamic element to a team that was constantly looking for it, and did a good job. Like nailed it. And then McNabb was just kind of leaning into who they were.
Okay, well, so all of these
taking advantage of Buffalo.
Yeah, for sure. All these worked out, but if you remember the Avs trade deadline deals in the early 2010s, you're probably going to want a Breck Brew. So go get yourself one. I recommend an Avalanche specifically, to not think about the some of the trade deadline deals that were completed by Colorado as they failed to make the playoffs. But Breck Brew's good, at least. You got that going for you. You can have a good beer. So jump on it. Go to your local liquor store. You can find them at a Breck Beer Locator online on their website. Also, be sure to keep an eye out for some deals. A little birdie told me Breck Brew is going to be giving us some Avs tickets to give away pretty soon here. So keep your eyes peeled for some cool stuff that we're going to be doing with them. Should be a fun time. And then go check out the American Raptors. They are over at Infinity Park in Glendale, which, by the way, go check out Infinity Park. It's just a dope place to like hang out for a day. They have all sorts of cool stuff that I highly recommend. But for the American Raptors, they are Rugby Towns USA's newest rugby team. They do kind of a cool thing where they take high-level athletes from other professional sports and bring them over to rugby to transfer them over and turn them into rugby players. They have basketball, baseball, football, even wrestling players that have transitioned. So it's a super interesting thing. Last year, that version of them ended up going 5-5. So they competed pretty decently in their league. You can find out more about them at AmericanRaptors.com. You can also get tickets for completely free. So if you want to check it out, you can go for free, hang out, have a great time. If you're a hardcore rugby fan, you can also stream all of their games from their website. Again, that's AmericanRaptors.com. And be sure to follow Colton Strickler on Twitter and the DNVR Rugby account. He does podcasts every single day. Well, not every single week, with 101 pods if you're new, or, regularly interviews players that range from legends of the sport to everybody on the American Raptors. So his coverage is awesome. Highly recommend you check it out if you have any interest in rugby at all. It's super duper dope. Third period of the DNVR Avalanche podcast, presented by DraftKings Sportsbook. Starting to get into the second half of the decade here, and things that are closing in to more recent, I guess you could say. And you're going to see most of these years, there's at least one significant move that gets made. It's not necessarily the hugest move all the time, but there's a significant move. That starts with Chicago in 2015. After 2 cups of not doing a whole lot, they kind of went out and did a bunch of stuff in 2015. First, they go get the old guy in Kimmo Timonen for a second and a fourth.
Yeah.
Kimmo was really not very impactful on that team. He was literally playing like 5 minutes a night in the playoffs. But
yeah, as that went on, the Blackhawks basically had a top 4.
Yep.
That they
Duncan Keith was playing 30 minutes a night. Yeah,
each of those guys was playing over 20 minutes per night, and their third pairing was legit playing like 8 minutes a game, if that.
It was not a whole lot going on there, but they also went out and got Antoine Vermette for a first and Klaas Dahlbeck. So more of an impactful move there.
So Klaas Dahlbeck was actually a pretty solid D prospect at the time.
Yep.
So that was not like, now we look at it and we're like, Klaas Dahlbeck, right? But like at the time, like he was a pretty good prospect.
I mean, funnily enough, at least all right. Vermette did okay in the playoffs, but he was kind of garbo for Chicago in the regular season.
Mm-hmm.
But the playoffs are when it counts, right? When you're making a move like that, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, and they knew they were probably at the end of that particular run, that window, whatever. They were really hurting for money. They were really, they didn't have very much young talent coming up anymore. They were really struggling, like beyond that year. And so that was the screw this. We're pushing it in and we're just trying to finish this thing off with a third cup. They got to it.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to push your chips to the middle. They also did trade Adam Clendening for Gustav Forsling.
Which ended up being a really good futures deal.
Yeah.
And I'm just not, it's interesting because Forsling has turned into a pretty good player. It just took forever.
Yeah. So it's a trade that happened. Didn't really have much impact on that actual cup run, but it happened. So is there such a thing as too much of an all-in move for Colorado this year?
I mean, like, if in theory, if they were to go out and they decided they wanted to get Calvin DeHaan and Claude Giroux and JT Miller, that's unnecessary.
Sure.
Because that's going to cost you Barron, Olesen, first rounders.
Yeah. You're emptying it out, really.
Yeah, like
everything.
you'll have nothing after that. You'll really have like cleaned out the coffers. And you wonder like how much of that helps you in the future, right?
Yeah.
Like how much do those guys stick around, and is all of that just for the one run? Like this Blackhawks run that we're talking about, Vermette and Timonen, like that was it.
Yep.
He got traded to Chicago, hit free agency, and turned around and signed back with the Coyotes immediately. So they they got rid of Dahlbeck in that first round pick, and
I mean
that they got that cup run out of him, and that was it. So to answer your question of is there too all in? Like, yeah, I think there's where you get too unnecessary.
Is the conversation there? If you're gonna go all in, it better work.
I mean, I guess I continue to struggle with this phrase "all in" because I don't think the Avs can go all in this year.
It's impossible.
I fully disagree. I think this is this year and next year are their 2 years to go all in because of the Nathan MacKinnon contract. Once you get into that new McKinnon deal, it's going to really limit what you can be bringing in.
The thing about
I think that's maybe the most overblown part of all of this, because EJ's deal ends at the same time. So your worst contract comes off the books at the same time. And you're essentially spending all of EJ's money on Nathan McKinnon.
Yeah.
And so instead of you just feeling like you're wasting that money, you're just spending it on your best player.
Yeah.
And so
that's a great point.
For me, I don't worry too much about that part of it. If they didn't have that obvious 1-for-1 right there, I would be completely with you. But when I say I don't think they can go all in, because I don't think that there are enough deals out there that make sense for them to make. Like, I just theorize that they go get Calvin DeHaan and Claude Giroux and JT Miller. Do any of us feel like that's even on the table within the realm of possibilities? Because that's what I think of all in as.
You're stretching to get even two of those guys.
And I guess maybe that's why we probably differ in going all in or not. Because my definition of all in is you go and get the big name out there. You spend the max amount of assets. You don't add around the fringes. You don't nibble on the outside. You go right to the top of the list. We're going that guy. So that's where I kind of define all in.
Okay. So well, if we're doing that, then I agree with you. They should do it this year.
Yeah.
Just because the guy that's available and the way that he fits on the roster makes that worth. But you also go back and you look at, why did Antoine Vermette get a first round pick that year? Because he was one of the best players who was available.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes to show you that not all trade deadlines are created equally.
Right.
If Antoine Vermette is the best player available at a deadline versus a Claude Giroux is available at a deadline, who is the best player available at last year's deadline? Probably Taylor Hall.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Probably Taylor Hall and like David Savard. And those guys went for first and second round picks. Yep. Savard got the first and Hall got the second.
Taylor Hall, that's an interesting one to follow, just because it's not very similar, but it's a similar situation to Giroux in the full no move clause. He's got a lot of control over where he goes. I will never, to this day, never understand why Taylor Hall signed with Buffalo.
So I think part of the reason that it makes it very hard for Colorado to go crazy all in, like where they do three different things, is they don't have the cap space, right? They can't just send out our 2023 first and second and third. They need to be moving money out too to go get some of these significant players, which makes it a little bit harder than Chicago's example here, where it's like, we'll go get Vermette and give you a first and no money going out, essentially. So a little bit of a different situation for Colorado this year there.
For sure.
2016 sees Adam Clendening get traded again.
Is Adam Clendening still in the league? Can the Avs, can he get involved in a deal for the Avs? Because it seems to work out.
They need to get him so they can move him, and that's how you win the cup. Right?
Just flip that.
Exactly. Let's see. He is not in the league. His last NHL game was in 2018-19. Anyway,
here goes the cheat code.
Pittsburgh, the big move is another hockey trade. Carl Hagelin for David Perron and Adam Clendening.
Do you guys remember that David Perron was in Pittsburgh?
Barely.
No.
I feel like I had no idea. I think of David Perron and I'm like, there was that one weird Vegas year. There was Anaheim at one point, and then it's been St. Louis.
Well, over Anaheim.
How?
Yeah. He keeps winding up back in St. Louis. It's been one of the weirdest. Like,
he was in Anaheim, right? Was he in Edmonton?
Perron?
Edmonton. Yeah,
Edmonton. Yeah.
He was in Anaheim.
Yeah,
he was in Anaheim. I'm not lying.
For like a quarter of a season.
Yeah, 28 whole games. He was in Anaheim. That's okay.
Carl Hagelin has been one of those players for me for years that I've had this like just weird, completely random like obsession with, where I was just like literally for a decade, I'd be like, God, I'd love for the Avs to add him.
I love watching him, dude. I love watching him.
He's so fun to watch. And I just, for so long, I've wanted the Avs to get him for no real reason other than what you said. I just love watching him.
Well, that was
I'm totally with you.
That was that era of Pittsburgh hockey where it was like, what if we just put literally anyone next to Sidney Crosby and see what happens?
Right. And it worked.
Yeah. Perron, Como, Hagelin, whatever.
Yeah.
It does not matter.
Chris Kunitz. I mean, he made Chris Kunitz an Olympian. That's how good Sidney Crosby.
I always feel bad. Chris Kunitz is never going to get to live on his own glory and his own accomplishments. He's always going to be a product of Sidney Crosby,
and he knows why. And he's very grateful. Every time he checks his online banking account, he's like, "Thanks, Sid."
Yeah, I was going to say he probably owes 2% of his career earnings to Crosby.
Yeah. That's. I would love to see a stat of how many of Chris Kunitz's points was Crosby also in on.
You also you think stuff like that because remember there was a David Jones in Colorado that everybody back then a lot of people talked about how David Jones was the result of playing with Paul Stastny, and then I went and looked, and it was like they were involved in the same goal like it was like 9% of the time, and it was like oh. Maybe David Jones was just good on his own for a few years there.
The other side of Pittsburgh in 2016 is they did get Justin Schultz for a third. I think this is an interesting conversation because they made a hockey trade for a forward, and then they went out and helped their defense too, however you want to feel about Justin Schultz, whatever. Doesn't feel it feels like something similar that Colorado could follow this year, where they try to move money out. Maybe it's a Comfer, maybe it's a Burakovsky, maybe it's a Jost or Murray, whatever, to get some forward help, and then they still need to flesh out their defense.
Yeah, and Justin Schultz ended up being pretty good for them. He was that like hot college prospect, and then didn't 100% live up to expectations in Edmonton, as nobody ever does for some reason.
Yeah.
And then gets to Pittsburgh and like becomes like a solid NHL player.
Yeah. He even became a little desirable after that around the league. Like I remember people talking about for a few years after that there was a lot of teams that were interested in Schultz.
That deal ended up being good for both sides. Like it really helped. It really helped Justin Schultz, and obviously Pittsburgh enjoyed the puck moving acumen.
Yep, it worked out there. Another big contributor in Pittsburgh's follow-up run, where Pittsburgh did do things again. Their second cup in the back-to-back for Pittsburgh was a little bit lighter at the deadline. They got Ron Hainsey for Danny Cristo and a second, and then Mark Street for a fourth. Very clearly wanting to improve their defense that year.
That was really like the end of Mark Streit too.
Yeah,
he was done as an NHL player.
He was no spring chicken at that point either.
Yeah, but it was like Streit was trying to get blood from a stone with Mark Streit at that. Like he was just done. And like did okay for them, but he was really just he didn't really participate.
3 games in the playoffs, and had 2 points in 3 games to be fair, but yeah,
the college free agents are all over the place. I guess it depends on, again, not all of them are created equally, right? Because sometimes you get an Adam Fox and sometimes you get a Danny DeKeyser.
Wait, was Adam Fox a college free agent?
He basically told everybody he was not signing unless he was going to go to the Rangers.
Yep.
And so he got moved around multiple times. Because he got drafted in the second round and then by Calgary, I believe. And then they moved him to, I think, Carolina. And then I think Carolina moved him. And then he was like, I'm not signing with you. And then but I think that's how it was.
So in the late 2010s,
Chris Drury was a pick, though. He wasn't a college free agent.
In the late 2010s, you start getting into this stretch of teams winning the cup where their deadline moves were kind of just nibbling around the edges. We already talked about Pittsburgh's second cup. You get to Washington in 2018 where they get Michael Kempny for a third and Jakub Jarabek for a fifth.
Kempny actually played a role on that team. That ended up being a pretty good move for them.
Yep. And like, I think the vast majority of moves we've looked at so far, or the vast majority of years, each team at least made one move where you're like, okay, that guy definitely helped them. It's just a question of how much.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you know the difference between what was enough to win a cup and didn't, then you're a trade genius and teams want your help.
Yeah, I was gonna say you should be hired.
2019, St. Louis only made the one move, Michael Del Zotto for a 6th.
Well, and that was the year. So the context here, that was the year where they were January 1st.
Yeah,
they were
the
last
worst
in the
team in the
NHL,
league. And then
so
Jordan
they were
Binnington
not
happened. Yeah,
they were not really in a position to like
buy.
buy, right? Like they were not going to go hard at the deadline that year.
Their deadline move was sending it with Jordan Binnington, like
pretty much. And like but Del Zotto didn't play any games in that Stanley Cup run, so that might as well just be no moves from St. Louis.
Yep, pretty okay with that take. Then you get to Tampa in 2020. Now, keep in mind the context. Tampa has been extremely good hockey team for years now. They get eliminated in the first round against Columbus the year before.
This is going big.
Yeah, so they sent it a first and Nolan Foote for Blake Coleman, and then another first and third, as well as a prospect for Barclay Goodrow.
Yeah, so Nolan Foote was their most recent first round pick.
Yep.
So essentially 2 firsts for Blake Coleman. The Barclay Goodrow was for a first, but they got a third in return. So it was really more like trading down from the bottom of the first to the top of the third is kind of how it functionally worked out.
It wasn't a first for no pick value,
right.
At least.
Right. And so they got the third back. So it was like trading down from 31 to wherever.
90 something.
Yeah. So a little, it's because we talk about it like, oh, they traded a first for Barclay Goodrow, but they got that high third in return. And so it's not quite the same as trading essentially 2 firsts for Blake Coleman, and that's it. Like, that's the deal. And then if we remember, Blake Coleman was originally reported to be traded to Colorado that day.
Yeah.
And that was the world's introduction to just how good Blake Coleman really was. There was a lot of hype on Miles Wood being any good, and the guy that was actually the dope one was Blake Coleman, and the real ones knew. And Barclay Goodrow, not the same level, but was an important part of that team, like a solid depth guy.
Yeah. It's an interesting look at Tampa specifically because you see them go all in, but you look at their team and you're like, they were already so good.
Yeah. They traded all these first round picks so that they could make their bottom 6 jacked as fuck.
Right. Yep.
Right.
So I saw some conversation in the chat earlier where it's like forwards feel like a luxury for the Avs this year. Maybe, but we've already talked about it on this show. The difference in the playoffs is often some dude on your third line.
Yeah. Well, and you look at last night's matchup. Look where Vegas was successful. It was against Colorado's. It was their top. Yep. It was their bottom 6 against Colorado's bottom 6. You still look at the Avalanche bottom 6 and you say production wise, points wise, you're pretty cool with how that's gone for them. You feel good about Alex Newhook. Alex Newhook held his own last night. But you look, Logan O'Connor got his head kicked in. JT Compher got his head kicked in. Tyson Jost got his head kicked in. You worried. That's half your bottom 6 that got their ass kicked last night. Now your top 6 dominated, like whooped that ass and was fine. Like you feel really good about your top 6 as is currently constructed. Now, if you get a Claude Giroux, you drop him into your top 6 and you move one of those other guys down. That's how you help your bottom 6 instead of going to get a bottom 6 player. Tampa Bay, what the lesson to be learned from Tampa Bay, Blake Coleman would have been a top 6 guy elsewhere. But as a bottom 6 guy on their team, gave them a big time advantage when their bottom 6 got on the ice.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that was their third line. I mean, Yanni Gourde, Blake Coleman, and Barclay Goodrow oftentimes would play together as a third line. Those guys are all in, 2 of those guys are in top 6s today. And I don't know where Barclay Goodrow is in the Rangers lineup. I refuse to watch them play. So you're talking Curtis McDermott didn't get his head kicked in last night. Had problems with the scoring. The scoring chances were too much, but those other guys got dominated. So that's where the conversation is oh, well, you don't need to go get Claude Giroux. You go get a middle six guy instead. Go get somebody else's JT Compher. And it's just like, okay, yeah, go get Vlad Namestnikov. I'm totally cool with that too. But getting the Claude Giroux pushes a better player down. If you have Alex Newhook and Andre Burakovsky on your third line, it's an interesting group. Now, it's not going to be super tough. That's why I always suggest Nichushkin. But you drop Nichushkin next to Alex Newhook. Alex Newhook's going to get a lot better.
Well, Claude Giroux, you think of it in terms of, and just using him as the example because why wouldn't
he's kind of like where we start all of the Avs conversations.
Right. But even a player like Pavelski, they help this group in particular in so many ways beyond just them coming into the lineup. Where that's the obvious upgrade. If you're look, I really like JT Compher. I like him as a player. He does a lot of this, so he's tough to love long term. But I like him as a player. I think he works hard. Blah 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 blah. If you're turning JT Compher into Claude Giroux, you upgrade the line that Claude Giroux is playing on so much because you're adding Claude Giroux. But the ripple effect that has throughout the bottom of your lineup, because then, again, just using Nichushkin, because I think you're right. I think he makes a little bit more sense with that group. But I guess the point is it doesn't really matter who it is, right? You bump Nichushkin down one, which then bumps down, again, pick someone, Abe Kubel or whatever. And now it's just now you've got a third line guy playing on your fourth line. You've got a second line guy playing on your third line. You got a first line guy playing on your second line. And then your top line is very well documented. Potentially, you have a very good argument for them being the best line in the league. Simply adding one player like that doesn't just make the Avs, oh, yeah, they got Claude Giroux, great. It just makes all of your lines that much tougher to match against. And when you get deep into these playoff series, that is what so much of these games come down to. What matchups are you winning? And that's a problem that the Avs top line ran into a little bit in that Vegas series last year. Their top line wasn't winning their matchup, and they struggled down their lineup.
Well,
you add Claude Giroux, and it just makes such a difference.
The Avs top line was not losing their matchup either. What was the problem was that Tyson Jost and JT Compher were going head-to-head against William Karlsson.
And they were in way over their heads.
Who was fucking blowing them into little bits and pieces every single night, just dominating them. Those guys, that Vegas' second line is what won them that series more than Vegas' star players. It was all Marchessault. It was all Riley Smith. It was all William Karlsson. Those guys destroyed Colorado. And it's because they just didn't have an answer. With no Nazem Kadri, they didn't have an answer. I also think that that's one of the things that we didn't really talk a whole lot about because it was look, he was suspended. He didn't play in the series. We have no idea what difference he makes. Watch the game last night. Colorado's top six did not struggle. Their top line scored both of their goals, and Colorado's second line dominated possession, was in the positives and everything that you care about.
Yep.
It was Colorado's bottom six that was the concern. And as far as I'm concerned, will continue to be the concern. Until Burakovsky's complete offense completely dries up, I'm not worrying about it that much.
Yep.
Well, and we saw Burakovsky. He's a streaky guy. I mean, that guy can go. Yeah, I guess he's already at 15 games, and then he could bury 7 in the next 4. And again, a lot of this has been a lot of these deals we've talked about. Yeah, you didn't really think that much of the player until you got to the playoffs. Berkey's got that potential. The playoffs start. I mean, he did it last year, right?
Every better piece you add is just insulation from streakiness, right? Not everyone's going to be super hot in the playoffs, but the more talent you have, the more you can get away with this guy going cold or that guy not playing to his best. So, Just to wrap things up in 2021, Tampa went out and got David Savard for a first and a third, and then they also had to give a fourth to Detroit so they could retain salary. A little bit interesting just because we could see if the Avs want to try and get creative, involve a third team to retain some salary or something like that. But again, this is just another team that knows it's very, very good and is trying to fill out a hole in their lineup.
Yeah, and David Savard ended up on their third pairing on that.
Yep.
All things like wasn't necessarily the plan when they got him, but ended up being a really good third. You know, he's on their third pairing, and you're like, well, things have gone pretty well for us.
Yep.
If they had any kind of injury or a guy wasn't playing up to snuff in their top four, that's a guy that easily would have slid into that and taken that job.
Yeah.
So that's a heavy investment, though, for that bit piece. But when you're talking about if they didn't have, because they didn't really have like a viable option there.
Yeah.
And you look at where they're weaker this year, it's in those spots. Gord, Gaudreau, Coleman, all gone. Their bottom six, guys like Ross Colton and such, Matthew Joseph, they've been okay, but they're just not the same. They're not fully formed yet. The Tampa Bay's bottom of their defense just hadn't been as good. They've just a big step back there that they're trying to figure out how to survive it. But they're also a great example of why this whole all-in conversation is kind of dumb. Because as long as you have your main stars, as long as the Avalanche have Cale Makar and Nathan McKinnon and Mikko Rantanen, they're going to compete. Like Washington only won that one cup, but you think that they have any regrets about that they won that thing? Like, oh, it sucks that they didn't win more. Pittsburgh's going to get 3 cups, maybe more out of Sidney Crosby. Obviously, that's a huge win. But do you think Washington feels bad about winning only 1 cup? Like I see in chat today and most days, it's, well, I don't want them to give up the future. I want the Avs to win a couple of cups. You got to win 1 before you can win 2.
Right.
Like the focus is on winning a cup this year, not worrying about how this deeply impacts their contention in 2025.
Right.
You do keep an eye on those things, but like if you can go and get Claude Giroux to try and win you a Stanley Cup this year, you should.
You can't get ahead of yourselves. How many teams have been really, really good that never won a cup? It's really dangerous to start talking about multiple cups when you have 0.
Yeah, I mean, go and look at the early 2000s St. Louis Blues with Al McInnes and Chris Pronger and Keith Tkachuk, like all Hall of Fame guys. And they had to go through Colorado, they had to go through Detroit, they had to go through Dallas just to get out of the fucking West.
Right.
Like it's just hard to win a cup.
I mean, look at the teams over the last handful of years that you have. Vegas hasn't gotten over the hump yet. Nashville never got over the hump when they had all their guys in their prime. San Jose
is a great one. That's like the ultimate fear.
Yep.
I think San Jose is the team that you're always afraid of becoming, the one that makes the cup finals, regularly plays deep into the postseason, and walks away with nothing from an era with multiple Hall of Fame players. That's the one that I think scares you.
Yeah, San Jose is such a weird because they only made it to the 1 cup final. Yeah, I don't know, man. That was such a weird team in the mid to late 2000s into basically the entire 2010s.
Yep.
Yeah. The Joe Thornton, Patrick Marleau, Joe Pavelski, Logan Couture Sharks. Like they just never could quite get over the hump.
Did they, because that might actually be a good example. Did they ever do anything where they went out and added, or I feel like they were a team that just kind of rolled with it every year and said, we believe in this group.
Let me pull it up.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And maybe I'm completely wrong.
If we could, can you give me the years that they had their best regular seasons?
They made the Cup Finals in 2016.
2016 at the deadline that year, they got Roman Polak and Nick Spaulding for Rafi Torres in 2 seconds, James Reimer and Jeremy Morin for Alex Stalock, Ben Smith, and a 4th.
Their best regular season was 13-14, where they had 51 wins.
The deadline that year, they didn't do anything meaningful.
Okay. And they lost in the first round to the Kings, who eventually.
Well, and they were the first seed. They were the first seed in 2009-10 against Colorado.
Yep.
And deadline that year, not much.
Because I remember that team being, kind of we like the group that we have here, and they may actually even be again anecdotal, right? But example of if you feel like you need to improve somewhere, no matter what your record says, if you feel like you need to improve, go out and try to improve yourself. Because, yeah, man, they had a lot of, nothing to show for it.
Post 05 lockout, lost in the semis, lost in the semis, lost in the semis, lost in the quarters, lost in the conference finals, lost in the conference finals, lost in the quarters, lost in the semis. Good, but not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally in 15-16, they make the cup finals, but ultimately lose to Pittsburgh.
They did have some active deadlines.
I mean, you have to have some when you're around the picture for that long.
For that long, yeah.
Yeah.
I would hope.
If you're really doing actually nothing, then
yeah, like the year that they gave up Tommy Wingles for Zach Stortini and Buddy Robinson in a 7th. Tommy Wingles was like a dude that people liked around the league at the time.
Yep.
They got Yannick Hansen for Nikolai Goldobin, who was one of their top prospects at the time. Obviously, the big Jamie McGinn, TJ Gagliardi deal with Colorado that one year. Yeah, they went hard in 2018. They got Eric Fair for a 7th.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Evander Kane deal.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
I mean, in more recent years, it's also kind of like
they've been more of a team that made a lot of their big moves over the summer. Though.
Yeah, where they do shit like go get Erik Karlsson and.
Well, that I remember. And obviously, this was before the incidents that happened when he was in San Jose. I remember that Evander Kane deal. Everyone being like, "Are you sure? Like, are you sure you want to do that? Given the way everything's kind of gone."
And honestly, maybe the deal that sunk that franchise is tying their wagon to Martin Jones. But
well, and that was really their big thing. Remember, they could never get a goalie.
Yeah.
Well, so I was going to say that earlier, but
searching for a goalie.
When did Evgeny Nabokov retire?
Well, I think he finished his career in.
Yeah, he kind of bounced around.
Yeah. I don't think.
Right.
Yeah.
He finished it in Tampa, but 2009-2010 was his last year in San Jose.
Okay, because I was going to say, because I know they had him for a while, and that was kind of considered their guy.
Well, and then they played that cute little game with Chicago where Chicago couldn't re-sign Niemi and what's his
Crawford,
Hjalmarsson. And
yeah,
and so they were like, hey, we're gonna offer sheet both of these guys, and you can only sign one of them, LOL.
Yeah.
And then they ended up getting Antti Niemi. Chicago let him go and picked Hjalmarsson, and ended up being the right call.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I wonder why they let him go. He was
Corey Crawford was in the AHL, and
I always thought
next 2 cups.
I always thought Antti Niemi was maybe the most overrated goaltender in the NHL for a couple of years there.
But anyway, point is that San Jose's big thing was they couldn't find a goalie.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that pretty much wraps up the show.
Wraps up kind of the approach that we took today.
Yeah. It's just interesting to take a look at what all the Stanley Cup champs did over the past decade or so. Outside of Chicago and the weirdness that was St. Louis, most of these teams at least did something. That something ranges from full send to nibble around the edges. So it's hard to really say that there's a right answer at the deadline. You have to take into the
No.
context of the year and the situation pretty heavily.
You only ever know if a team was right at the deadline after the season is over and if
Yep.
they've won the
Well,
cup or
and-
not.
Haven't we been saying that about Darcy Kemper going back to this last summer? Like
Yeah.
even that deal, even before, anytime a team makes a move where they say, "Look, this is what we think we needed to get us over the hump," that's the jury is out on that until the season's over.
Yep.
Like even Darcy Kemper is obviously on a fantastic stretch right now, but if that dude played 890 hockey all season, and the Avs get into the playoffs at in the third seed in the Central, and then suddenly he catches fire and takes them on to win a cup, you're like, "Yep, every last bit of it was worth it."
Yeah.
Don't give a shit about the regular season. Every last bit of it was worth it. And it's the same thing with deadline stuff. The Avs could go out and get Claude Giroux, and he could not put up a point the rest of the way in the regular season. But if he goes off for 23 points in the playoffs
That's all
en
that
route to a
matters.
Stanley Cup, it's like, dope.
So
Do it all over again.
And what you're talking about is actually not super uncommon where a guy struggles to fit in during the regular season because he's adjusting. The thing with the trade deadline is guys only have 15 to 20 games to figure it out, right? To get comfortable. And then once they really start to get comfortable is right at the end of the year and then going into the postseason. And then a team that's going on a postseason run, things are obviously clicking. If they weren't clicking, your games played is 6 and nobody ever thinks about it again.
Right.
So, it's an interesting thing that what a guy does. Cause and you look at, hey, one of the big fish a couple of years ago was Mikhail Bodker. Colorado went and got that guy. Mikhail Bodker lived up to his end of it. The rest of the team fell apart and they missed the postseason entirely.
Right.
all right.
Yeah.
On that note, we're going to end this show. Thank you, everybody, for watching, listening, however you consume. We appreciate y'all a ton.
Go read Megan's piece about
Man.
John Luke Foodie that is on the website right now and be prepared for a big feature piece tomorrow morning from Jesse and myself.
Very, very good time to get yourself a DNVR membership with the foodie piece and what AJ and Jesse have cooking up here. So go check those things out. Go read them. They're dope. Highly recommend. We are off tomorrow, but we'll be back in the morning for the game Saturday. So be sure to tune in for all of that. We will talk to you then.